They said the seats were for family only, but somehow, mine was the only one left empty. My name is Vanessa Reed, 24 years old, born in a quiet Ohio town where the church bells marked every Sunday and the air smelled of cut grass and routine. I'm the eldest daughter of a family that always believed success came in sequins and spotlight, and in our house that meant my sister Claire. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in the echo of her applause, the golden child, the dancer, the dream fulfilled. I was the quiet one, the one who built things instead of performing them, who solved problems instead of causing excitement. But even quiet hearts have limits. If you've ever found yourself standing in a room full of people you love and realizing no one truly sees you, stay with me. Maybe you'll recognize a part of your own story in mine, and if you do, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes saying it out loud is the first step toward healing. At home, our walls were covered with Claire's framed ribbons and dance photos, every smile perfectly centered. My corner of the hallway held only a shelf of old textbooks and a stack of certificates still in envelopes. Mom said she'd frame them when she found the time. Dad said he was proud but couldn't remember what the awards were for. On holidays, our dinner conversations circled back to Claire's choreography, her next competition, her coach's praise. When I spoke, the silence afterward felt heavier than any criticism. The contrast was almost poetic. Claire's world was applause and spotlight, mine was lamplight and late-night notebooks. She twirled, I typed, she filled rooms, I filled pages. Yet, whenever our family prayed before meals, Mom's voice always trembled with gratitude for our talented daughter. Singular. As if God, too, had forgotten there were two of us. I used to think love had a sound, laughter, cheering, a name spoken proudly across a crowd. But I learned that silence has its own language, and in our family it said, "You're strong enough to go without us." I believed them for a long time, until the night they texted that they were too tired to attend my graduation, the night I decided to stop waiting for their permission to exist. Because what they didn't know, what the world would soon find out, was that I wasn't just graduating, I was valedictorian at Harvard, about to step onto a stage where the microphone would finally belong to me. That message, "too tired," became the spark, the quiet fire that would turn into something far greater than their absence. And as I pressed send on my reply, "Rest well," I knew this story was only beginning. That night, after replying, "Rest well," I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still glowing in my hand. The words looked harmless, polite, even. But they carried the weight of every empty seat, every unspoken slight that had built up through the years. Outside, Boston's winter wind pressed against the dorm window. I watched the lights across the Charles River blur into streaks of gold, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt done. The next morning, campus stirred awake under a pale sky. Students were taking photos in their crimson gowns, families arriving with flowers and cameras. My roommate, Maya Patel, twirled in front of the mirror and laughed. "Can you believe it's over?" I smiled back, but my reflection looked different. Calm, distant, quietly certain. "Yeah," I said, "it's finally over." When I stepped outside, the air felt sharper than usual, charged with something between loss and liberation. I walked past clusters of families reuniting, the kind of noisy love I used to envy. Parents holding banners, grandparents crying, siblings arguing over photos, 1,000 tiny scenes of pride. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Somewhere between the late nights at the library and the long silence of my childhood, I had learned that love unspoken doesn't mean love absent. Sometimes it just means love needs translation. I reached the gates of Harvard Yard and paused. The bell tower tolled 8 times, the sound rippling across the brick paths. And I thought about how many years it had taken me to get here, from the girl who used to stand beside other people's cakes to the woman holding a speech titled, "From the Empty Chair to the Open Mic." I wasn't. A few hours later, I walked into Sanders Theater for my final rehearsal. The hall was empty except for the janitor sweeping the aisle, the same man who'd smiled at me every morning for years. He paused, leaned on his broom, and said, "Big day tomorrow, huh?" I nodded. "Nervous?" he asked. "Not anymore," I said. "I used to think no one would ever hear me. Now, I just hope the right people do," he grinned. "Trust me, they will." That small exchange grounded me more than any pep talk could. It reminded me of something my grandmother once said when I was 16, the night she found me writing in the garage by the light of a single lamp. "You don't need applause to be valuable, sweetheart. Some of the brightest stars burn where no one looks." Back then, I didn't understand it. Now I did. Later that afternoon, I went to the commencement office to confirm my guest seats. The coordinator smiled politely. "3 family chairs, right?" I nodded, then added softly, "Yes, 2 filled, 1 left open." She looked confused, but I didn't explain. That empty seat wasn't for guilt or revenge. It was a symbol, a promise that even absence can be acknowledged with grace. That night, as I laid out my crimson gown, Maya teased, "You really think your speech is going to make people cry?" I smiled faintly. "I'm not trying to make them cry," I said. "I just want them to see." She didn't press further. She didn't have to. The truth was, I wasn't doing this for my parents anymore. I was doing it for every quiet kid who ever wondered if their voice mattered, for the girl who smiled beside the wrong cake, for the teenager whose parents never showed up to the science fair, for the woman I had become, steady, unshakable, finally unafraid to take up space. And as midnight crept in, the wind outside grew colder, rattling the window like a soft warning of what was coming. Tomorrow, the world would see my speech, and by noon, my parents would too. I didn't know how they would react. I just knew one thing. Whether or not they showed up, I finally had. Morning broke bright and cold, the kind of spring light that made everything look cleaner than it really was. The air outside my dorm smelled of lilac and rain. I woke before my alarm, not out of nerves but out of habit, years of rising early to prepare for days that no one would remember. Only this time, it felt different. This day would not vanish into silence. Maya was still asleep, tangled in her blanket. I brewed instant coffee, watched the steam rise, and thought of the night before. That calm certainty in my chest, the promise I'd made to myself to stop waiting for anyone to show up. Today, I wasn't proving anything. I was simply arriving. By the time I reached the yard, the orchestra was tuning. Students in crimson robes clustered in circles, laughter spilling into the morning air. Families waved signs, cameras flashed. I moved through the crowd quietly, a small smile tugging at my lips. Everywhere I looked, I saw versions of love. Loud, chaotic, imperfect, but present. For a second, I wondered what it might have felt like to have my parents there. My mom crying behind her sunglasses, my dad awkwardly holding a bouquet he probably forgot to remove the price tag from. But wishing for that now felt like reaching into a drawer that's already been emptied. Near the front rows, I spotted the 3 chairs with my name tag. Grandma Helen was already there, wrapped in her pale blue coat, the same one she wore at every important milestone of my life. The science fair, my first scholarship award, the day I left for college. Next to her sat Maya, camera in hand, radiant and restless. Between them, the 3rd chair gleamed white under the morning light, crowned with the bouquet I'd arranged the night before. White tulips for forgiveness, a single crimson rose for truth. Grandma saw me and raised her cane slightly, a quiet salute. I smiled back. The orchestra began to play Pomp and Circumstance, and the sea of crimson robes started to move. As I joined the procession, the sound swelled around me, strings, applause, bells ringing from Memorial Church. And then, suddenly, everything slowed. I saw families standing, clapping, cheering. I saw little kids perched on shoulders, waving flags. And in that moment, I realized something. The crowd wasn't what mattered. It was the few faces that glowed steady among the blur. Grandmas, Maya's, the janitor in the aisle, the professors who'd stayed late to help, the strangers who'd shown up again and again when others didn't. That was my family, chosen not by blood, but by presence. When the ceremony began, the president of the university spoke about resilience, how hardship forges character. I listened, hands folded, the wind brushing against my gown. Then I heard my name announced, this year's student commencement speaker, Vanessa Reed. For a heartbeat I couldn't move. Then, as applause rose around me, I stood. The sound wasn't deafening. It was steady, respectful, real. I walked to the stage, my heels sinking slightly into the grass. The sun flashed off the podium's glass edge, momentarily blinding me. But when my vision cleared, the view made me inhale sharply. Thousands of faces, a horizon of red and white, and in the very center, that single empty chair. I began softly. Good morning. If you look closely, you might notice an empty chair in the audience today. Don't worry, it's not a mistake. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I used to think an empty chair meant loneliness, I continued. But now I understand it can also mean strength. Proof that you showed up for yourself, even when no one else did. Somewhere in the distance, camera shutters clicked. A breeze brushed the flowers on the empty seat, making the tulips tremble like they were listening. I spoke about growing up unseen, about how silence can bruise but also teach. I talked about the invisible students, the ones who clean the labs, stay late, share notes, listen without being asked. I said, at Harvard we talk about excellence, but excellence isn't just achievement, it's kindness under pressure, it's showing up. As I spoke, I saw the faces in the crowd change, the tearful smiles, the nods of recognition, the quiet hand squeezes. It wasn't a grand speech, it was a confession dressed in hope. When I reached the last lines, I looked at Grandma. She stood now, her cane in one hand, the other resting on her heart. I smiled, my throat tightening. To my grandmother, I said softly, who told me that some stars burn brightest where no one looks. Thank you for looking. This is for you. The applause began slowly, then swelled, rising like a wave. People stood, students, professors, janitors, strangers. In that roar, I didn't hear revenge or vindication. I heard belonging. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the back of the field. A woman in a beige coat, standing alone, watching through sunglasses. Her hands were clasped, trembling. She wasn't holding flowers, but she was there. Mom. She didn't move closer. She just stood for a moment, then turned and left quietly. I didn't stop my speech for her. I didn't need to, because this time I wasn't the one who'd missed out. When the ceremony ended, confetti shimmered in the air, and the sound of bells filled the yard. Maya ran to me, laughing through tears, holding up her phone. It's everywhere already. Your speech is trending. I looked up at the sky, wide, clean, endless, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not vindication. Peace, because the truth had been spoken and the world had finally listened. And as I walked off that stage, past the empty chair now bathed in sunlight, I whispered under my breath, this was never about who didn't show up. It's about who finally did. That night, the campus was still humming from the ceremony. The air over Harvard Square smelled of rain and roasted coffee, and every few seconds a car horn or burst of laughter reminded me the world was celebrating. But my celebration was quieter. I sat by the dorm window, still wearing the crimson tassel that had brushed my cheek hours ago, and watched the reflection of the yard flicker across the river. My phone lay face down on the desk, vibrating in short, relentless intervals. At first, I ignored it, but the buzzing wouldn't stop, like a pulse reminding me that silence, even now, had its price. I flipped it over. The screen lit up with the name, Mom. Below it, Dad, Claire. Then the flood of notifications, missed calls, text messages, voicemails. For a long time, I just stared at the light on the screen until it dimmed again. Maya was across the room editing photos from the ceremony. She glanced at me, saw the look on my face, and set her camera down. "You're not going to answer, are you?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Not yet." She nodded, not pressing further. "Then at least eat something before you pass out, valedictorian." We laughed, the kind of soft laughter that exists between people who understand each other's silences. But later, when the laughter faded, I finally picked up my phone. There were dozens of messages. "Mom, why didn't you tell us you were giving the speech? Everyone's asking why we weren't there." "Dad, you made us look heartless, Vanessa. Couldn't you have warned us?" "Claire, guess I'm the villain now, huh? Thanks for that." Each word hit with the same dull sting, guilt disguised as defense. I read them all, then set the phone down. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because their messages weren't about me, they were about control. They were about being seen on their own terms. The same story, just rewritten to make them the center again. But the world had already shifted. The university's social media page had posted my speech, and the clip was spreading fast. A still image of me looking toward the empty chair, tulips glowing in the sun, had become the thumbnail everyone was sharing. Beneath it, captions read, "She built her own seat. From silence to spotlight, #build your own seat." By midnight, my inbox was overflowing. Professors, reporters, organizations, all reaching out. A fellowship in Geneva, an invitation to give a TEDx talk, a letter from the dean calling the speech a turning point in the language of inclusion. But none of it made me feel the rush I'd expected. I wasn't chasing headlines. I just wanted peace, the kind that doesn't need to be justified. I called Grandma instead. She answered on the first ring. "They're calling non-stop," I told her. "I imagine they are," she said calmly. "Let them call." Guilt has a louder ring than regret. Her tone was steady, warm, unshakable. "I didn't mean to embarrass them," I whispered. "You didn't," she said. "You revealed them." Sometimes the truth is the only mirror that makes people finally see. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Grandma's words echoing like a lullaby made of wisdom and mercy. The noise of the world, the applause, the backlash, the calls, faded into something distant. Because deep down, I knew I hadn't spoken out of anger. I'd spoken out of clarity, out of love even, the kind that refuses to lie anymore. By morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, turning the dorm room gold. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Mom. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I stared at the words for a long time, then typed slowly, "Not to fight, to listen." Her reply came seconds later. "Tomorrow night, the three of us. Please." When I looked up, Maya was watching me, eyes questioning. "You're really going to do it?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because this story doesn't end with applause. It ends with truth." And in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not to prove anything, not to win, but to finally sit at the same table, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman who had learned how to build her own seat. The next evening, the lights of Cambridge glowed soft and steady. I baked bread, set the table for 4, and placed a single candle in the center. No empty chair this time, just space for whoever truly chose to show up. The evening air over Cambridge was cool and quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like a held breath before something important. The table was set simply: 1 loaf of sourdough, a pot of tomato soup still steaming, and 4 bowls waiting. I'd chosen every detail carefully: plain linen napkins, soft light, no background music. This wasn't a dinner to impress, it was an invitation to tell the truth. At exactly 7, there was a knock on the door, not sharp, not timid, somewhere in between. I opened it to see my parents standing side by side, both looking older than I remembered. My mother's hair was pulled back neatly, but her eyes darted around the room like she was searching for safe ground. My father held a paper bag, store-bought cookies, the peace offering of people who didn't know what peace required. Behind them, Claire lingered, arms folded, pretending to scroll her phone. "Come in," I said softly. They did. We ate in silence for a while. The clink of spoons against bowls was the only sound. I could feel my heart beating in the pause between each bite. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Your speech," he began. "It took us by surprise." "I know," I said, keeping my tone steady. Mom looked down at her soup. "People keep asking why we weren't there." We didn't realize it was such a big moment. "You didn't realize," I repeated, not cruelly, just quietly. That's been the story of my life. No one spoke for a long moment. The candle flame wavered between us like a small, flickering witness. Then I said what I'd been holding for years. Every important thing I did, science fair, scholarship, first publication, you weren't there. There was always a reason. Claire's rehearsal, your work trip, someone's exhaustion. I stopped asking because every no sounded the same. My mother's lips parted as if to defend herself, but Grandma's old words echoed in my mind, and I raised my hand gently. "I don't need an apology," I said. "I just need you to understand what absence does. It builds a house so quiet you can hear yourself disappear." The words hung heavy in the air. My father exhaled, the sound rough and tired. "I thought you didn't need us," he said. "You were always so strong, so capable. We focused on Claire because she needed more." My mother's voice broke. "We thought giving her attention wouldn't take away from you. But it did, didn't it?" "Yes," I said simply. "It did." For a moment, no one looked at anyone else. Then Claire finally spoke, voice small but clear. "I was jealous of you, you know. You never asked for help. I thought that meant you didn't care what they thought. I didn't realize it hurt you this much. Her confession didn't fix anything, but it cracked something open, a window that had been painted shut for years." I nodded slowly. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "Just tired of pretending that love and showing up are the same thing." "They're not." My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Then let's start showing up," she whispered. I didn't pull away. That's all I ever wanted. We sat there, not reconciled but real, a family stripped of its excuses. The soup had gone cold, but the silence was no longer hostile. It was honest. When they stood to leave, my father looked at the framed photo on the wall, me on stage, the empty chair beside Grandma. He stared at it for a long time before saying quietly, "You filled that chair yourself." I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said, "but there's still room for others, if they choose to come." As the door closed behind them, the candle on the table flickered low, steady and alive. The room smelled of bread, rain, and the fragile beginning of something almost like forgiveness. The next morning, sunlight streamed across the kitchen table, glinting off the empty bowls from the night before. The house was quiet, but not hollow anymore, the kind of silence that follows understanding, not absence. I poured myself a cup of coffee and looked at the small wooden chair in the corner. It was the same one I had once placed beside the stage at graduation, now with a handwritten tag tied to its back. "For who shows up?" That chair had become my rule for life. Not everyone who loves you will show up. And not everyone who shows up will love you. But presence, real and consistent, is its own kind of truth. My parents hadn't transformed overnight, and forgiveness wasn't a single meal or an apology. It was practice. One visit, one honest word, one effort at a time. A week later, when I gave a small talk at the Cambridge Community Center, I saw them arrive 10 minutes early, sitting quietly in the back row. No flowers, no grand gesture, just presence. And for the first time, that was enough. I looked at them, then at the crowd, and said softly, "Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like being seen, finally, and without noise. If you've ever had to build your own seat because no one thought to pull one out for you, remember this. Every nail, every scar, every act of patience is proof that you were strong long before they noticed. You don't need a stage to be seen, just the courage to take your place, even if it starts with one quiet chair in a corner. So, if this story spoke to something in you, if you've ever carried your own version of that empty chair, let it remind you that healing begins the moment you stop waiting for applause and start showing up for yourself. And if you'd like to keep hearing stories like this, stories about family, forgiveness, and quiet justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Not just to follow my voice, but to remind yourself that you too have a place here. Because in this space, every story and every person who shows up matters.